He threw the antique painting directly into the roaring fire. He stood there for over an hour, watching the heat blister the oil paint. He watched the heavy, ornate wooden frame splinter and crack. He didn't blink until the entire thing had turned to gray ash. He took a deep breath, the smell of burning varnish still heavy in his living room. He felt a wave of absolute relief. It was finally over. But when he woke up the next morning and walked into his bedroom, it was hanging perfectly above his bed. Not a single scorch mark, not a single scratch on the wood. It was exactly as it had been the day he brought it home from the estate sale. He froze in the doorway, his heart hammering in his chest. He approached the canvas slowly, his eyes scanning the dried oil paint. And that is when he noticed it. It wasn't just that the painting had survived. The picture itself had changed. When he first bought it, the pale woman inside the canvas was standing in the deep background of a painted, dimly lit hallway. She was just a shadow, a tiny detail barely visible in the dark architecture. Now, she was standing in the very center of the painted hallway. Her features were clearer, and her painted, dead eyes were locked directly on him. Panic gave way to rage. He pulled the painting off the wall, carried it out to his garage, and grabbed a heavy steel splitting axe. He swung it down onto the canvas, tearing a massive hole through the woman's painted face. He swung again and again, shattering the wooden frame into hundreds of jagged splinters. He took a heavy utility knife and sliced the remaining canvas into tiny, unrecognizable ribbons. He swept every single fiber, every scrap of wood, and every flake of paint into a thick, black industrial garbage bag. He tied it shut in a dead knot, drove it to the city incinerator, and watched it drop into the industrial furnace. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in a chair facing the empty spot on his bedroom wall, waiting. Morning broke. The wall was empty. He let out a breathless, exhausted laugh. He had won. He closed his tired eyes for just a fraction of a second. When he opened them, the frame was back on the wall. But the woman was no longer in the center of the painted hallway. She was now pressed completely up against the foreground of the canvas. Her face was huge, dominating the entire portrait, distorting the perspective of the room behind her. Her pale, impossibly long fingers were visible at the bottom of the picture, gripping the inside of the wooden frame. He couldn't breathe. The air in his house felt toxic. He grabbed the frame, ignoring the freezing temperature of the wood. He drove 3 hours north to a massive, isolated reservoir. He rented a small aluminum boat and rowed out to the deepest, darkest center of the water. He took heavy iron chains, wrapped them tightly around the portrait, padlocked them shut, and threw it over the edge. He watched it sink into the black depths, down into the freezing dark, where no one would ever find it. He drove home in absolute silence. He locked his front door. He bolted his windows. He nailed heavy wooden planks over the glass. He walked into his bedroom. The temperature had plummeted. His breath plumed in the freezing air. The painting was waiting for him. The canvas was soaking wet, dripping freezing black lake water onto his hardwood floor. But the worst part wasn't the water. It was the sound. From inside the two-dimensional canvas, he could hear something moving, a wet, frantic scratching. The canvas itself was bulging outward, stretching and warping into the real world. Her painted face was pushed so hard against the invisible barrier that her features were flattened. He was paralyzed by terror. He slowly reached his hand out to pull the frame off the wall one last time. But as his trembling fingers neared the cold, wet oil paint, he felt warm breath hit the back of his hand.